This is Holding Left Edge with Christian and Simon.
Nice.
Sexual.
We're going.
We are back again.
Welcome to episode 7, that many, of Holding Left Edge, the shooting podcast that deals with the spin. You know me, and all being well, if you've paid attention to previous podcasts, you know this chap. It's the wonder that is Rob Ramsden. Evening, Rob.
Cheers, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. For those that don't know you, give us a really brief who you are.
Really short. I'm the guy who formalized precision rifle worldwide, basically. I helped start up and set up the IPRF. I wrote all the rule books. I wrote all the constitutions. I pretty much did pretty much 95% of the work behind the scenes to get the whole structure of the whole thing built and sorted out. So in a nutshell, yeah, that's kind of who I am.
Okay. And you're also a shooter. You've competed internationally.
Yep.
You've shot in the various disciplines all over the world. So you've not just seen one version of shooting, you've seen it in different countries. People will probably tell from your lilt, you like what I did there, you're not from the country you live in. So you're South African living in Southern Ireland. Do you only live in countries that start with the word South?
Well, it's not the Southern Ireland. This is Republic of Ireland. So move on. Come on, be fair.
It's just Ireland officially, isn't it? All right,
Exactly.
Okay, fair enough. I'll give you that one.
Come on. It's my new home. I love this place.
The reason, like anything, we do podcasts about things that interest people. I think the majority of podcasts we've done so far have come off the back of people asking us questions. So like the sponsorship one, lots of people asking questions about sponsored shooters and all that. Social media, we did one about that. The reason Rob's here tonight is because one of the big questions we've had over the last few months, probably down to the fact that there's been the World Championships out in the IPRF World Championships out in America, and because people are also gearing up for the IPRF 2-2 Worlds in the UK. One of the questions that's been buzzing around an awful lot is people seeking some clarification in relation to what factory division is. So it's called production in other genres of the sport. So the purpose tonight of us getting on the table was to have a conversation about factory, because we've both got some very strong views on it. So that's why I've invited Rob along, because as far as I'm concerned, no one understands what factory should be better than you. There might be some people out there that have the same opinions and agree with you, but we'd have to go a long way to find someone that knows more on the subject than you. Is that a safe bet?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I'm the guy who wrote it and came up with the whole idea for it in the first place. It was probably the single hardest division to write in the rulebook. Actually, just probably one of the hardest parts of the rulebook to write, and it probably took the most amount of research time and effort into actually putting it together. And it was really difficult.
I bet. And for the benefit of people out there in podcast land who are either listening or watching, see, Christian, I'm learning. There are a number of categories. We'll focus on precision rifle because it's a common language we have, but it's not exclusive to precision rifle. You have factory and open are the two main elements within this sport. Open is open. You can interpret certain things in certain ways. Factory, and then within open you have ladies, juniors, military, veterans, seniors, and all that sort of stuff. That's what the IPRF and I could be wrong. The NRL.
And then we had limited division as well, and then we had another division called field division, which is
that's right
at the time, yeah.
And then in PRS they call it production as opposed to factory. Is that right?
Very different, very different. Okay, and there's a lot of confusion about that. Yeah.
So, and that's what we'll try and dispel today. So for people that aren't familiar with it, there are these different categories you can shoot in. There are benefits to be in each category, and I would argue there are pitfalls in being in some categories in terms of the level of competition and things like that. But we're just going to focus on what Rob and I know and love. I think it's a fantastic division within a sport that's already good. And we're going to talk about factory. So for people out there in podcast land, can you explain briefly what factory division means?
Okay, this might take a little. I'll try to keep this concise. I mean,
I'll keep you on track. Don't worry.
Let's not have a late night tonight like last time. Very quickly, when we were putting the rules together, there was quite a lot of discussion about this division and what it should be and shouldn't be. And we went down 3 very separate routes of trying to decide how to get it right. Okay. And at the time, there was production division, which is the PRS one, and they had like I think it was $1,500 at the time was the rifle, and the scope was $1,500. It could have been 2,000. I don't remember offhand. And it's a moving number all the time, and it's very, very, very difficult to deal with outside of USA. Because as soon as a rifle is in the States, it says, well, this is how much it is in the States, and that's what it has to be worldwide. Well, that's great, guys, but we've got import duties in some countries. Some countries are paying 175% more than what is retail price sitting in the USA. So how do you deal with that? And the opposite goes along the line of, well, you've got rifle makers in Europe who are making firearms. They're selling them here for better prices than they are in the States. So how does that work? So there's no comparison that you can possibly make worldwide on a financial model of some sort. Okay, so that was just the basic outline of those two of trying to create a price parity type system. It just wasn't going to happen. Secondly, the price parity system or putting setting a value at a product, saying, well, listen, you can only have it at $1,500, right? Means that you are cutting out all the top end of the market. Now, at world championship level, it means you've got a self-defeating division, because basically you've got shooters who come to a match and they buy something from a factory and it's basic level and it fits within that budget, and they go to the match, right? And they love the sport. They think, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. I want to get better at this. And about 3 or 4 matches down, they think to themselves, I probably should have bought a better rifle, right? If they're serious about it. And that's really talking about guys who are going into the high performance side and then upwards from there. In other words, becoming your top competitors. A lot of guys will be really happy with that bottom end rifle, and it'll suit their purpose absolutely perfectly fine, and they'll have a fantastic time competing at it, right? But that's not an international division, right? That's not a world championship division, because as soon as you get better at it, you actually want better equipment, and you want to get further up. Maybe trade up to a better rifle, better factory rifle, and so forth and so forth. So the division itself is self-defeating, because you're always moving the top people out of the division all the time. So that wasn't going to work in the long run, right? So we started looking at other options. There was a mention at the time of saying, well, hold a sec, let's say we will call a factory a company that has to make 500 rifles a year or 1,000 rifles a year. I think there was even at the time we were discussing 2,000 rifles a year, right? 2,000 rifles a year is a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's, oh, it doesn't have to be rifles, it just has to be firearms. It's, well, hold a second, does it have to be firearms or rifles, or what does that mean, right? And then we started looking around and looking at all the numbers. And you start going, well, hold a second, we've got guys in companies in Italy who are making small runs of rifles, right? But it's a full rifle manufacturer. Should we be cutting them out? They're a manufacturer, right?
And arguably some of those are the more exotic factory rifles that cost a lot of money, that have a lot of quality components and parts that would have been excluded if that was the
not
case.
even all of them. There are a couple of really good Italian rifle makers who are small run rifle makers producing some very nice factory division rifles. I think, if I remember correctly, the Italian team were using some of them. A company called BCM was producing it, right? Small run rifles, great. And he was fully behind the team. So it was great to see a manufacturer getting behind it. But so you start going, well, hold a second. Then you start looking at maybe a company, let's say Cadex out of Canada, right? They're not a massive mass producer. So you're going, hold a second, well, that's not going to make sense. Where do we cut the line? And then you start looking at, well, what is a manufacturer? Is it somebody who just slaps pieces together and makes a rifle, right? There I think 3 or 4 companies like that do that in America. And America's great because you've got this absolutely astronomical market with people who've got a pastime of going out and hunting and shooting. You know, it's a national sport, and you can see that from the results at any world championship. I mean, it's dominated by the Americans, as it should be. You know. So you started kind of going, well, hold a second. We're not going to get, if we try to do it by numbers, we're going to get a whole lot of people who just slap rifles together, effectively just gunsmiths, versus a whole lot of top-end manufacturers who are having to produce the entire parts themselves. That's not going to work. right? It just fundamentally wasn't going to go, because you'd be cutting out chunks, primarily European companies.
You'd ultimately, for a parallel that a lot of people understand, you'd be excluding companies like Ferrari and Maserati.
Correct.
Because they produce as many cars as Ford. Is
Correct.
what we're basically saying in a nutshell.
Yeah, basically in a nutshell. Exactly. That's a really good analogy. Yeah, that's it.
I have him occasionally when Christian's not here. He'll watch his podcast and he'll smile
to get something right.
You've done well on your own.
Yeah. I'll remember that for future reference, by the way.
Yeah, you can have
that. So we started looking a little bit more on, and I mean, I can't tell you. I think I've got a list of 300 to 400 rifles that I researched during that time, right?
I remember that. I remember the list circulating back in the early.
It was absolutely monster, right?
It was relentless.
And I was going through each of those things, every single rifle, looking at all the parts in those rifles, who makes the actions, who makes the chassis, who does the barrels, who does the triggers. And initially it first came out that we were going to actually include the barrel as part of the equation, right? But very quickly it was, well, hold a second, that's dumb, because the barrels are a consumable part, right? And good luck trying to get a replacement barrel from a factory.
Can I just have a little footnote here at this point? And I'll point out to people in podcast land why you were going to this effort in terms of the due diligence you needed to demonstrate as on the committee member of the IPRF. Now, you had to do all this because ultimately people would come to you with a firearm and you had to know whether it was a yay or a nay. Now, I'm gonna throw this out there just so it's been said and then we can move on from it. But when it comes to factory division, one of the big things I liked was the element of fairness, the element of two people being able to go against each other, completely fair. The reason you had to go to that length was because there are people who, I'm not going to use the word cheat, that's the wrong word, and that's an inflammatory word, but there are people that would try to utilize any technical benefit by using a firearm that improved their chances. So people would say, well, I can get a little bit more out of that. I'm within the rules. And I'll say loopholes and grey areas is something you were trying to avoid by going to the lengths you went to in naming every firearm. Is that about right?
Well, absolutely. You can't, I'm trying to try to explain this. You've got to be very, very specific in factory division, right? You can't have, it cannot be a grey area. You've got to have black and white, right? It's got to be extremely clear. And that's why we ultimately settled down to, it was the chassis, the action, and the trigger, right? Had to be either generic, or they had to be proprietary, or they had to be manufactured by that company.
So the chassis, the action, and the trigger.
Yep, as separate
things that you settled on.
As also, and they are viewed as separate items, right? Okay, so on a single rifle, you could have a generic action, right? A proprietary chassis, and you manufacture the trigger yourself, or something like that, right? Okay, and that's how it was kind of set up. And it came down to we were having issues with, well, some manufacturers use other companies to produce their parts. In other words, they hold the IP for it, but they will outsource their manufacturing. So we couldn't link it down to, well, you have to manufacture it. Well, because by rights, well, it wasn't maybe manufactured specifically by that person, and then you start getting nitpicking, and it becomes an entire mess, and everybody's just being an idiot, right?
What word you use frequently that we need to clarify for people like that? The word proprietary is a word that features heavily, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just talk you through the three things themselves, right, as to what each word means and why it was put in there specifically, right? The term generic is a term that was used for something that is literally, it's an Acme part, right? It's got no branding on it. Nobody knows where it came from. It's a part that is made by somebody. It has no proprietary technology in it. It's literally, I could take it, if I decided I don't want to buy it from that manufacturer anymore, I can get it made somewhere else without anybody suing me. It doesn't have nobody can lay ownership to it, right? It's generic, right? Then proprietary is a term that comes down to, it's a legal term, basically. It means that you own it, right? It's yours, right? And I think a good analogy that I was thinking about it a little earlier today was, take a coffee collar. Do you know what a coffee collar is?
A coffee collar?
Yeah. So you go to Starbucks, right? You go to Starbucks and you buy the little slip that goes over the side of the
mug
to stop your hand getting burnt, right? Coffee collar. Right, okay. So let's say I make coffee collars, and I'm the coffee collar manufacturer, right? And you come along, right? Actually, that's my technology, right? Now, if you come along and say, right, well, that's a great idea, right? I like that idea. I've got a better idea for that. I want to make it that it's got a little lip on the top of it, goes over your hand, so that if you spill your coffee, it doesn't go over your hand, right? And it lips over the side of that. So the two are attached together. Now I've got a coffee collar with a cuff, right? Great. So you've come up with that idea. It's your proprietary technology is the cuff part of it, right? But I still own the underlying rights for that. If you see what I'm saying.
Because without the cuff, there's no
so the basic
collar.
technology is still proprietary to me, right?
Mhm.
So I can say, well, listen, I'm sorry, Simon, but I'm not going to give you the rights to make that anymore. Tough luck, right?
And when
And
you
you
say
can go-
rights, you're talking about things that have been patented typically.
Patented, yeah, it's basically a patented right. Yeah.
It's having the intellectual property. is
Well,
what
it's not necessarily patented, right? It
Okay.
could be a trademark right.
Okay.
It could be some sort of right that you've got that you own, right? So you can't go ahead and then decide, no, that you're going to take that away, right? That coffee collar, and you're going to get it made somewhere else. And Simon says, I don't like this relationship with Rob anymore. I'm going to go and get my coffee collar added onto a coffee cuff, my cuff added onto a coffee collar on my own, and off you go. Rob's going to go, I'm sorry, buddy. I'd like some royalties, please. I own that technology, right? So that's the proprietariness that it belongs to me, right?
Okay.
So
For those tuning in late, this is the coffee podcast with Rob
coffee
and Simon.
podcast. Yeah. So
Very
basically, in
well.
terms of rifles, right, you've got to look at who owns the underlying technology of something, right?
Right.
To be honest, most of the time, it's the manufacturers actually produce it themselves. So the word we used in the past, which used to say also manufactured by, which effectively actually was a loophole that nobody ever used, right? Is that that's actually unnecessary. This proprietary covers that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right, because if it's proprietary to you and you manufacture it, well, happy days. If it's proprietary to you and somebody else manufactures it, well, happy days, right? So the manufactured by really didn't make any sense in the long run.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And
did that kind of explain it?
Yeah, what people will pick up on podcast land is that I never pretend to have the answer to everything or that my word is final. But I also know a little bit about this subject matter, but I'm as enthusiastic about finding out things from you as people listening probably are as well. And it's a very complicated area that sometimes what I've found is people can intentionally be ignorant about it, because when something's complicated, the easy thing to do is just say, I don't really understand that, so I'll just blag it. And unless we had this conversation about sport instructors in the past, and unless you have a proper understanding of the subject matter, an experience-based understanding of the subject matter, it's quite hard to actually understand what you can and can't do. And one of the things I've seen recently is lots of people coming to me and asking me questions about specific rifles. Even I'm running some Savages at the moment. We've had a conversation, wonderful little B22, and it's an MDT chassis. And I had to reach out to you and say, tell me about this. And we established that the reason that becomes a factory rifle is because the same MDT chassis exists, but the one that's for sale in Punterland has a folding stock on it. You can't buy this chassis separately. It has to be bought on this rifle. So that's a manufactured by thing, isn't it?
Yeah, if it's no, hold a second, right? If it's manufactured by somebody, right, they actually physically make it. Now, those are the tooling parts. So, in other words, if let's just take, I don't know the rifle, by the way. So I need to, I'm going to talk about it theoretically because I actually just don't. What you're giving me now is about as much as information as I understand, right? If MDT make it, right, and it is based on technology that is theirs, right? So MDT is proprietary technology. Then the rifle would not be allowed in factory division, right?
But it's a chassis that's been made specifically for this rifle.
Right. So let's take one that works the same way is I think it is the Savage Axis, I think they called it, right? It's got a carbon fiber stock that was made specifically for Savage, right? You cannot get it anywhere else on the planet other than Savage, right? MDT do not sell it. You can't buy from any reseller type thing, right? That is proprietary to Savage.
Yeah, it's the same deal as this one. You can't buy this stock.
And again, they commissioned, obviously Savage commissioned that particular chassis. They own the rights for it, right?
So when people see that happening and they think, well, how can that happen if there's a big brand like MDT on it? It's because they've had to have something made that is completely different to what everyone else can buy separately.
Correct.
Entirely for that rifle. So
Correct.
We'll talk about Bagara in a short while, but you look at Bagara have just released a range of top-end rifles with MDT chassis on them.
Right.
And it's a one for the conversation later down the road. But hopefully some people now listening understand just how complex this subject matter is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, personally, I find it very easy to understand, right?
You're dead clever, though.
It's a very simple thing. It's, well, can I take that chassis, right? Could I, as a manufacturer, right, I put it onto my rifle. Can I take that chassis, right? Sell the rights to manufacture that to somebody else, or get somebody else to manufacture it and cut out the initial supplier who built it in the first place, right? Who owns the technology. And when the answer is no, you can't because they're going to sue you. Well, at that point, you kind of go, well, sorry, that's no longer a factory rifle. In other words, and I think if I was a gunsmith, right, and I was to take a MDT chassis, right, and I would then scan it in a nice 3D scanner, do all the whole, put it all together, and basically make an identical copy, right, and produce it. I should imagine that the guys at MDT would be very, very, very unhappy with me, right, because they own it, right. And that really is the crux of it. It's proprietary to them.
Okay, makes sense. So that's hopefully again we could do hours and hours talking about this. But
yeah. There are lots of examples one could go through.
The thing that factory has over other divisions within precision rifle is that it's seen as an entry point into a sport, as opposed to
stop there. No, okay. It was never designed as an entry point to the sport, right? Okay, and let's go back to the design part. Right? So looking at it, if we put it in as an entry point to the sport, right? What's an entry point?
A way to get into a sport that's more.
What is an entry point?
Like that.
Right? What's an entry point? I'm asking, and this is the crux of it, right?
So why
is an entry point a cheap rifle, right? Or is an entry point? So we looked at it when we obviously crossed out the whole production division side of it, right? So when we put the thing together, it was more like building, the DTM touring car series that came out in Germany, right? Basically it was BMW, I think Volkswagen, Porsche, and Mercedes were all duking it out for many, many years, right? That's kind of the model that we were looking at. Now, if you look at the price of a DTM, so a Mercedes 190 DTM car, right? Those things were bonkers expensive, right? Not an entry level car, right? So the series was never built for that.
I didn't stop it. Right. What I meant to say in my ham-fisted northern way was, if you're looking to get into the sport and you're looking at the different divisions you've got, you can see how high performing some of the open shooters are based on all the technology. So it's a more appealing division to go into as someone new to the sport, because there's a perception of that it's a more even playing field. How's that?
I think that there is confusion by the production division side of it in thinking that, right? And I don't think that's the case. I think that there is a trick that the national federations, the national associations in each country are missing completely, in that they're confusing the tool with the game, right? And would it not be a better idea to have a introductory series, like an amateur series, right? Okay, which would basically mean pitch up with whatever you've got, compete in it, right? If you win more than 2 matches, right, or if you get more than 5 points, which are going to be, or if you're in the top 5 in more than 2 matches, you're no longer considered to be in the series. Move on to the next, right? Wouldn't that be probably a smarter thing to do?
It would be wonderful, but it doesn't exist. So in terms of the real world that exists, in terms of the real world that exists now, I'm thinking of going and shoot my first precision rifle match.
Right.
I'm looking at what rifle to buy to get into the sport without spending too much money or overcomplicating my tools.
Right. Straight up, my advice, right, would be go spend as much money on your scope as you do on your rifle, right, to start out with, right? Do that, okay? Get out there, go shoot open division, right?
Yeah.
And have a great time.
So we don't need factory then, is that what we're saying?
No, factory division is a little different, right?
So no, we're talking
It's a
about
choice to
so
go into factory
we'll end
division.
the podcast by saying we don't need factory. Doesn't need,
No,
everything should be open.
There's a large place for...
You're being far too analytical about a very simple question.
Yeah.
I'm on a sofa wanting to get into a sport, and the perception is that factory is an easier transition because you don't have to do all the smithing and aftermarket additions and changing this and changing that. You can buy something off the shelf like a Precision,
Okay.
and you can just go straight out with it and not make any changes to it. All the Tikas and all the Seikos that fall into factory.
Yep.
All
You
the
can do that.
Bazaras that fall into factory. It's an easier way into the sport. I'm not saying it's the best way. I'm not saying it's how you do it or what the purists would do and all that sort of stuff. But that's why factory exists. I think it's an accessibility thing for me personally. There's a bonus. There's a bonus to it in that I think factory's there to engage manufacturers more positively and to get them to be invested in developing new platforms like AI have done. You know, people making precision rifle specific firearms like Bagara did with the Elite. And I think that's what factory does, is it stimulates manufacturers to try and compete. I'd say try and compete with some of these open collaborations that are happening, where you've got companies, proven companies like using barreled actions and chassis and the MDTs and the Voodoos and the Rimexes.
Yeah, I mean your open guns. Yeah.
So for people out in podcast land, factory is there because it's a softer entry into, I think, a softer entry into the sport. You then, like you said, you progress so far up factory, and then a lot of people go, I'm off to open because I can do more of what I want. I've got more freedom in open.
Factories are more. It's kind of more classical division than open is, right? It's you're restricted with what you can add onto the rifle, right? Because remember, anything that if you've got a chassis, right? Really, what you're trying to look at is what is the ergonomics of that chassis. You know, does it ergonomically work for our sport? Now, if you can just add what you want onto it, well, you can change your ergonomics as you feel like it, right? Mm-hmm. And so factory division stops you from doing that. It says, right, you've got to compete with it as it is.
And for me, I want to know who the best shooter is. And the best shooter isn't always the person finishing at the top. The benefits you can have from kit, and we could talk about limited. We're not going to talk about limited, but the benefit you can have from all the things you can pay to make better, I think takes away from the absolute skill of it. And we've both been there on a range when we've seen someone rock up with what people would say a lower end budget rifle, or a rifle that's maybe out of place with precision rifle shooters, and you can see the skill because they have that skill. They're using a hunting rifle with a hunting optic, and they're still able to take part. So for me,
I mean, if I could jump in there, right? If you take your budget that you get when you're starting the sport, right? Okay, divide it into 3. Actually, possibly 4 even, right? But let's start with 3. Let's say rifle, scope is 2/3 of it, right? The other third is ammunition. Mm-hmm. Okay, take that ammunition, right? 1/3 of the cost of what you're spending, right? Okay, in ammunition. Go do some training, and not just down the range blatting from a target. Go do some training. If you spend that money on ammunition, you will get better quicker than anybody has good kit to start out. Mm-hmm. Training is everything.
Yeah, but then equally, better ammunition gives you an advantage than less ammunition. So if you can't afford to run Hornady,
well, that's the progression of the game of our sport.
Exactly, and that's why limited is an interesting conversation in its own right.
Yeah,
I've quite regularly said to people with various 223 platforms, there's a box of 55 grain S&Bs. The playing field is immediately levelled. If everyone's using the same ammunition, and I get limited, that limit is a different conversation. But so without dwelling on it too much, that's why factory, I hope people understand that's why factory exists. I'm a purist. I like to use the word, it's a more purist division. It encourages a clearer representation of outcome based on skill.
You haven't got any crutches. You've got no place to hide.
Best way to put it. Best way to put it. So that's why factory exists in a nutshell.
But part of it as well, when we put it together, was for the we also wanted a place for the manufacturers to take part in our sport, right?
Well,
which is important. Which is important, you know.
Go on, mate. Sorry, go on.
No, just when we looked at the production division in the States, right? It was really a truncated division because it cut off at this price point, and it didn't allow for Ferraris to exist, right? You know, you haven't got Bentleys, Ferraris, Bugattis, Aston Martins, Porsches, all those type of things. They just would be out of it. But in motorsport, you've got those are all of your aspirational vehicles, right?
Mm.
So we need aspirational firearms in our sport. You know, we need manufacturers going, hey, wow, this is cool. Let's get behind this and let's build some cool stuff that sell their rifles and people feel aspirational about.
And that's the point I was about to answer about. There's a mutual benefit to factory. There's a benefit to manufacturers, and there's a benefit to shooters.
Absolutely.
And those two things, in terms of the division, needs to continue to exist. Otherwise, the ability to engage manufacturers and give them a platform, I think, diminishes significantly. And ultimately, they'll step away from Formula One, and they'll just allow it to be some road race where everyone can have big spikes on the tires and they can spit oil out the back and all that sort of Mad Max nonsense. If they're not engaging,
which basically turns around to it becomes a whole performance division just running around basically tweakers. In other words, open division all over again, right? So we get open 2.0 and
exactly.
What are we doing here?
And if you're a shooter and you have, as many people have done, plans just to stay in factory and be a factory dude, and those dudes exist. Those dudes do really well in factory.
Yeah. I mean, listen. Once you either love being in factory or you move on to open, right? It's a slightly different way of shooting the sport. You're slightly limited on certain types of stages. You can't use plates. You can't use if rifles don't come with weight kits, you can't balance them properly. It's quite a difficult. You've got to shoot with what you've got, right? And but at the same time, there are manufacturers out there who are recognizing that they want shooters to use their particular equipment, and therefore sponsorship is available in factory division, probably more than most of the other divisions. But
and there are people that have gone out. There are people that have gone out and purchased those factory rifles that have the extra things on. So I remember back before the Worlds in France, some people moved to factory rifles. That there was an inherent advantage in having them because they came with things that other rifles didn't. If that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think at the time, it was really cool. I mean, there are two companies at the time. Then there were two companies really doing some cool stuff back then. It was Accuracy International was producing the ATX, which was was kind of crazy because we put these rules together, and about a month or two before we actually launched the IPRF with the first set of the rules, Accuracy International came out with their rifle. We were like, "Wow, you guys beat us to the." You know, they came out straight away. But then came the Victrix rifles. You know, and then the Venus came out, and it's, you know, and I mean that's a cracker of a rifle. So those guys had Arca rails where the rest of us were. I mean, I was still using an old Accuracy International AX, right? So it's rounded forend, that type of stuff. So yeah, definitely, it's a lot more difficult shooting with a rounded forend than a nice flat Arca rail to work with on the front, especially when you're doing bag work. So yeah, so there definitely are advantages of manufacturers who are going, wow, this is a sport we want to be involved in. These are the things that sport wants. And then providing them, and we're seeing that growth happen. I mean, everywhere at the moment.
And so keeping factory at the forefront of people's minds can only be a positive thing when it comes to engaging those manufacturers and for them to push their technology on and to develop their rifles in house. Some manufacturers may start making proprietary parts or putting proprietary parts in their rifles, whereas previously they didn't.
Absolutely.
So they become
Absolutely.
more. They could become more pure.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, some of the guys are even recognizing that there's no differentiation in the rules for how many rifles you make and so forth, right? There's some things that need to be tightened up going forward. There are definitely some things we learned in the meantime that would need to be tweaked, right? And I hope that is actually happening at the moment. But there are rifle manufacturers coming out who are putting weight kits into their rifles, as available as a factory, straight out from the factory. It comes in the box with a weight kit, job done and dusted, right? That's awesome to see. That's really, really cool. So the guys getting, and they're putting up their pro versions of rifles coming out. I think both AI, Victrix, and I think Cadex are doing pro versions of their rifles with stuff that you can get on it. It's great to see those manufacturers looking at what the rules look like and putting things in place to provide out the box shooting experiences for competitors, for athletes.
And I think it applies equally. I know the 2.2 footprint isn't as big in other countries as it is in the UK, but I think it applies equally to 2.2 as it does to centerfire.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the same premise. There is no difference in the factory division rules between centerfire and rimfire.
The difference is when we talk about that entry into the sport, 2.2 is a much more natural entry point for new shooters in the UK.
Absolutely.
So my plea to manufacturers is harking back to conversations I've had with significant people in the industry back in the day. How do you get kids shooting? How do you get them to be customers for life? You get them into the sport, and 2.2 is that obvious vehicle to bring kids into the sport. For
Absolutely.
them to graduate and centerfire and off they go. So if you're a manufacturer or you're someone out there looking at how do we deal with this situation, look at what you're producing. Because there are a number of big manufacturers out there that don't make a 2.2. They might make 2.2 compliant factory guns, but they don't make ones that are going to be competitive. Good example being Bagara. They make a fantastic 2.2 B14R trainer or whatever people want to call it, which people take to competitions day in, day out. We use them day in, day out. They're a fantastic piece of kit, but the HMR premise, no arcer on it. If you're going into a factory competition with that, you're using a swivel stud, and you're trying your hardest you're working a lot harder than the guy next to you that's running either like a Savage B22 or CZ or whatever it might be. I've got my fingers crossed that one day Bagara make a 2.2 that's factory compliant.
I mean, I think at the moment the 22 factory rifles, I think there's huge potential in the market for manufacturers to produce awesome precision rifle 2.2s. I think that market is massive right now. I think somebody's going to walk into that and go, right, here's a really top factory gun, and they're gonna do well, right?
Well,
I was thinking about that. That was I've lost it. Move on.
Well, you've lost your thought. I mean, one good example of that is I was fortunate enough to sit behind the Victrix 2.2.
Yep.
Venus, I want to say, I'm terrible with names.
That's a cracker. Okay, that is a cracker.
That again, that's like, it's forward thinking. That's putting out a factory compliant gun.
John absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
That isn't cheap, don't get me wrong, but then we've had a conversation. We've moved on for the fact that it can't be measured by cost, otherwise it becomes a problem. But they've put out an entirely factory compliant 2.2 gun that looks good, that runs, and like I say, complies. It's not a hard thing for manufacturers to do if they turn their hand to it, is it?
No, it shouldn't be. Hopefully not, right? I mean, it's hopefully they can take the chassis that they've got in house and convert. Work with the 2.2 examples of it. It's a big market.
I mean, we've talked about. I've been keeping some sort of script. We spoke about the history of it, and we spoke about the early doors and what people are having to do. And there are only a number of rifles out there now. Going forwards, factory. There are people who are shooting factory, who are using rifles that. How do I word this now? The people that are just scratching their heads and saying, how does that qualify as factory? There's been a couple of occasions now.
Yeah.
This is where I tread relatively carefully, and Christian chose not to be with us tonight. I saw it watching from afar when people we're running into they're running through qualification periods with rifles that ultimately didn't make it as factory rifles because they fell short of the intricacies of it. With no secret in saying that the Bergara Elite is one such rifle that isn't classed as factory because of, is it just because of the MDT chassis?
Yes, I think it's also got a
Trigger Tech.
a Trigger Tech trigger in it as well. Yeah.
So I, as a naive person that sells Bergaras, I was under the impression it was going to be factory, and that's naivety on my part because I don't understand the ins and outs of it. But we got to a point where people were using them, and for all intents and purposes, they looked and acted like a factory gun, but they failed to be a factory gun because of those two things. Then, because they're not parts that are proprietary to Bergara. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
The factory division can only stand as well as the people who are adjudicating the rifles in the background, right? In other words, if somebody does not clearly understand how factory division works, right, and says yes, this can be in and that can be out, right, then things are already falling apart, right? Secondly, it has to be consistent, right? What you apply from one person, you have to apply to another. It's very, very simple, right? In the first World Championships in 2022, we had a chap from Poland arrive with a Savage Precision. I think it's 110 Precision, I think it was, right? And that's got the MDT ACC chassis. I mean, it's an excellent chassis. I mean, it really is good, right? I mean, if I was putting a REM 700 type rifle together, I'd be using.
Let's take point to say that the reason MDT features so much is because it's the market leader in chassis.
It's a cracker, absolute cracker.
It's the market leader. We're not saying it's the best.
Yep.
We're not saying that this is better than that.
It's one of the market leaders. Absolutely. I mean, there are at least 4 companies up there who are top stock manufacturers, chassis manufacturers, who produce chassis for the REM 700 platform that they're all cracker chassis. So even though it was a MDT, right, it had a Savage action. It was fitted for a Savage action, right? Okay. So now that makes it slightly different. Okay. Have a think about it. It's now very specific. It's now you can't get that chassis anywhere else. You can only buy it from Savage, right? However, the ergonomics of the chassis and the tooling of the chassis are still proprietary to MDT. In other words, Savage couldn't have taken that, right? Severed the relationship with MDT and told them to go fly a kite.
They'd have to give it back. Absolutely.
Right. Sorry, guys. So that kind of says, and everybody refers to it as the MDT chassis on the Savage, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because Savage is doing smart things there, right? They're using the leverage of basically a top chassis being on a relatively inexpensive factory rifle. That's clever. That's super clever marketing.
And it's exactly the same as they've done with the B22. It's
correct.
It's an £850 out of the box factory gun.
Right. Because what
they stamped on the side of it.
Yeah. So what they're doing there is they're leveraging another person's technology. So that company who makes the rifles didn't spend. So let's just take a look at the factory rifle side of it. You've got these 3 components you've got, right? The action, the chassis, and the trigger. Now, if I'm personally making the rifles and I've got $100, right? I've got to divide those up in some way to make that rifle, right? I've got to do the R&D in the background. I've got to come up with the tooling paths for the machining. I've got to get a production run going. I've got to do all of that work in the background for that $100, right? But now, Savage took a shortcut on that. So they cut out their entire R&D tree by producing that, by using the MDT chassis. I mean, it's a smart move, right? Totally smart move. But by doing so, it cuts them out of factory division because it's no longer fair, right? You're not competing. That rifle is now taking. They've got no development budget in that rifle in terms of the chassis side of it. They've put 50% into their action and 50% into their trigger, and they've just bolted on the chassis on the end. So is that fair to other manufacturers who are in the same division? Well, it's not, right? And that's kind of how you got to look at it. So it's that side of it of creating a fair playing field for the manufacturers to compete in and for us to use those rifles that they've made for us.
And the danger is if the perception from the unwashed masses is that it hasn't been fair, and people are looking at rifles and saying, I don't think that should have qualified for that, or they have personal views on whether something should exist in a certain category.
Yeah.
Right for recourse is massive, isn't it? Because what you end up doing then is
I don't know.
About, let me just get these words out, because the big words that you talk about, like making the court of arbitration for sport and things like that. And I'm trying to point out how difficult a job it was for you to manage it back in the day, and why you went to the efforts you did to try and demonstrate you've done as much as you can.
Let's just talk through that, right? There is no recourse in this for any manufacturer on the sport. If some rifles are allowed in and this is not allowed in, apart from a whole lot of strongly worded letters and telling people to go fly a kite, I'm getting out the sport, never helping, never sponsoring anybody else again. Which, I mean, and this is a reality, is that a manufacturer could turn around and say, well, you've slighted me, right? I'm not going to sponsor shooters anymore, okay? And that's their choice, right? But they don't really have I don't think that they've got a legal standing in this case, right? However, the legal standing that now switches onto the competitor, the athlete, right? Because if one athlete cheats by using equipment that doesn't fit the rules, right?
Okay. We're not saying cheating. We're not saying cheating. Has an
unfair
advantage. There's an unfair advantage.
No, hold a second. It is termed in rules as being, in other words, if I was to use a baseball bat that had lead inside it in a baseball match, right?
Yeah.
I'd be a cheater, right?
Yeah. You'd have an unfair advantage.
Come on. I'm cheating. I'm using a piece of equipment.
The intent of that would be proven. Right? But you'd have an unfair advantage, we'll say.
Absolutely, right? So first of all, there is the recourse in the rules for appeal, right? There's a whole appeal section in the back of the rule book, which you can take to appeal. Okay, secondly, if you're feeling if an athlete is feeling slighted by a national organization or international organization, they feel they've run through the appeal process and they are still being, they still don't feel that they've got their rights resolved, right? The next process is to approach the Court of Arbitration of Sport. Okay, and this is not something like it's a massive organization. If you go online and you go into a Court of Arbitration of Sport and you look for an arbitrator, you'll probably find in small countries there are at least 3 or 4 arbitrators. In big countries there are massive numbers of arbitrators, right? And when you get to things like when you do at Olympic level and things like that, you actually have courts of arbitration of sport in Lausanne, I think New York, and there are a couple around the world of actual courts themselves. And that's where you take, an athlete has the ability to take an organization to task on rule infringements, right? And that's where this could ultimately end up if one were to disagree with how interpretations have been done and how things have been done.
And we're skirting on a very difficult subject because we're trying to be as fair as we possibly can. But it's safe to say that with no name, no patrol, there are people that have come away from the Worlds in America not entirely satisfied that it was an even playing field. Is that a safe way to put it without... We're not criticising anyone individuals, but we're talking about what people are saying to us when they're asking us our opinion on things.
Well, I think to be fair, I mean, let's be pretty straight out blunt about it, right? And we've had 2 world championships. We had the issue in, I believe it was in Italy last year, where Anschluss had, I think they came along with a MDT chassis on their 22, right? Now, somebody made a mistake and said, hey, everything's all fine. Which if you look at it a little bit more carefully, well, it definitely wasn't okay, right? And at that point, a mistake was made.
An honest mistake.
Well, I think so. I mean, it's hard to tell. You know, it's. I think
there's a lot of data to work through. There's a lot of things in checks and balances. So me looking in, that would have been a mistake that was made as an oversight as opposed to an intent to deceive personally.
Absolutely, and I think that at the time the premise was, well, it's kind of got a different action. I suppose it's okay. I don't quite know. It won't fit into another rifle, right? Not actually understanding that. Well, if you were to take MDT out of the picture, Anschluss would never be able to make that rifle, right? It's and that's the proprietariness that's being missed in this whole thing. So by doing that, it's kind of like, well, and this comes down to the problem of defending factory division. You have to be absolutely ruthless about it, right? Because let's take that Anschluss rifle. And it's a great rifle. It's a crack. If you're getting into precision rifle in 22 and you're going to shoot open division, right? Buy that. Go out there and buy that. That is an absolute cracker.
This is the bright red one, isn't it?
It is brilliant, right? It's an absolute brilliant rifle, right? Now, let's say that because of this part, effectively what's happening now is that Anschluss is now no longer, in this particular case, right, in the way in this example, doesn't become a manufacturer anymore. They've manufactured the action, right, and they've manufactured the trigger, right, both of which are arguably top in the world, right? But they haven't manufactured the chassis. So now they're actually a component assembler. They are no longer a factory manufacturer. Does that make sense? Right?
It does to me. So what you're talking about is a company that on face value is a firearms manufacturer.
Right. The gunsmith.
They're not making everything or having everything made for them. They're ultimately putting other people's parts together and selling finished firearms.
They're basically what we refer to as assemblers or gunsmiths. And you're not. If I go down to my local gunsmith and I say to him, right, mate, I'd like you to make me a kicker of an open division rifle, right? I'd like a Defiance action, please. I want an MDT ACC chassis on that, and I'd like a trigger trigger because those are awesome, right? And he'll make them for you, right? He's not a manufacturer, right?
And unless all those parts are things that only he has and that no one else has, it will always be an open gun.
It's always going to be an open gun, right? So if any one of those
if
parts,
you happen to walk into the Victrix, we'll use Victrix as an example because they're one of the more purer, I think, examples. You walk into Victrix and you say,
actually, ticket is probably your best and safest example is going to be.
You walk in there, and so we'll pretend that they're this person now, and you'll say you walk in there with all the money in the world because you've got loads of money, and you say, I want me to make you this, but I only want you to make it, and I want you to make it all proprietary. And they would produce you a factory gun and off you go, because they've got the technology and the ability to produce those parts to source.
They could absolutely.
But if you're putting rifles together and all those parts aren't proprietary, then you become a rifle assembler, and that rifle can never then be factory. That's what we're saying.
Well, at that point, you're a gunsmith.
You're a gunsmith, but it can't be factory because if you trace the lineage of it, well, it's like a family tree, isn't it? You trace the lineage of something, you say, hang about, what about this here? I can buy this, or it's owned by someone else, or this isn't yours and you don't completely own it. Then you become the bastard relative and you're not a pureblood. Pureblood, why haven't I said that before?
Oh, mate, don't go there. It's not Muggle territory, buddy.
No, but I'm talking about like family tree is a really interesting way to look at it. In that ultimately you look at royal families and lineage and whether you've had something come along that it isn't of royal blood, and you cease to be eligible to be the king. So what we're saying is factory division is a king. That's what I've just sort of surmised, really. That's
the best, right? I mean, that's why I love shooting it. But anyway, moving on.
Hey, there's people coming out of open shoot factory in time for the Worlds in the UK next year. So
best they choose a factory division rifle according to the rules.
But so when you say once you go open, you never go back. That's not true.
Well, hold on. And I think let's. So this year at Worlds, right? We had the MPA rifles, right? That came in that everybody's asking about, right? And that's really what a lot of the guys are going, hey man, what's going on over here, right? Because it's a cracker of a rifle, right? It's and arguably it's a really good open division rifle, right? But it's not a factory division rifle. I mean, in my opinion, there's no way that it can do. Right? It doesn't meet the qualifications. The action itself is made by American Rifle Company, who has a patent on the toroidal bolt system on it. So in other words, it's not only is it just made by them, it's actually patented by them, right? So if you take their technology and their proprietary part of it out of it, right? Unless MPA actually owns American Rifle Company or owns the patent to that technology and has bought it from them, well, it can't be owned by MPA, right?
But that would be a due diligence issue for the IPRF.
Yeah, they've got to sort that out, right? And that's
for them to. But am I right in saying there were circumstances where people turned up in America with rifles expecting to shoot them and weren't allowed?
That's what I heard. I mean, someone's telling me the other day about it.
An Italian chap or a French chap who turned up with a Bagara and wasn't allowed. He flew over. With
it's either Italian or French. I can't remember. I mean,
so the point there is that this clarification needs doing well in advance of these events to save some poor sod flying over with something that's just an expensive hat stand.
So I believe he had the new Bagara Elite Precision, right? Okay. And obviously, because that's got the Trigger-Tech trigger in it, and it's got the ACC chassis, right? It's not a factory rifle.
But that the theory then is that wasn't made clear to him beforehand. Otherwise, why would he have done that? So then
I've got no idea, mate.
But it goes back to unless he misunderstood.
Right, beyond my pay grade.
What you can hear is this division is only as good as the structure behind it.
Correct, as the people behind it who are enforcing the rules and applying them in a consistent manner, right? And I think that's what's got people so upset about the initially it was the UNSHA side of it, right? And now have got. I've got guys. I've spoke to people recently who are calling the MPA rifle. It's called the open factory rifle, right?
But that's for the IPRF, isn't it? If someone if they've done their due diligence and they continue to, they have to allow those rifles to be used in that category, in that division. So that's.
I personally would love to know how, right? Given what we've spoken about in the last hour or so, right? How that could possibly have occurred, right? Because it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, we've had quite a long discussion about what makes and I think that rifle's also using a Biggs and Andy trigger, right? And that again is also patented, but in favor of Biggs and Andy. So again, that's proprietary technology that is owned by another company. So there's no possible way that could possibly even exist. I just don't understand it.
And for what I'll say for the benefit of fairness, you're not the first person to say this to me. I won't pretend to know enough.
Yeah, I've heard this. I've been hearing this as well. The last couple of weeks, there's just been a whole lot of people asking me the same question.
I won't pretend to be an expert in relation to this stuff. I know as much as I know, and I try my hardest to be surrounded by people that understand the law better than I do, and the rules, not the law, the rules. So the question then is, it's a confidence thing, then, isn't it? Going forwards, that will have to be addressed if those concerns are out there. I think that's what
I would really like to hope that they are addressed, because it undermines the trust issue that competitors have got in it. I mean, what does a competitor know now? And what's he going to do when he goes to buy a rifle? Is it in the division? Is it not in the division? Yeah. Is it, the MPA rifle is really good. It's a top open gun, right? I mean, look at it. I even had I heard a comment. This was crazy. It's about a week ago. Somebody said to me, one of the factory division shooters switched over to the MPA rifle, even though he thought it wasn't factory. He considers it not to be factory legal, but he would be at a disadvantage if he didn't shoot it at the World Championship.
So I'm guessing those conversations are out there in the wide world and the internet and stuff like that. So
yeah, we've seen comments recently. I mean, you see snidey remarks on Facebook posts when companies come up with new rifles and go, "Oh, that looks like a new factory rifle," tongue in cheek, because the IPRF are not being consistent about how they apply this. and then they're not applying it fairly to all manufacturers. So it's kind of, I think some of the shooters are just kind of going, hey guys, seriously, come on, what's going on here?
Is that the key to it, that the responsibility of the IPRF and the individual sporting federations for countries, it's their responsibility to reassure all manufacturers that everyone's got the same crack at it. Because
absolutely,
if the perception, I'm not saying this is the accuracy or the reality, but if the perception is that something that there isn't a level playing field, you do two things. You dissuade individuals from taking part in that division.
Correct.
But then you also have manufacturers turning around going, why should we put R&D into, there could be someone sat there who's thinking,
potentially, yeah,
we were going to make a battery rifle, now we're not going to bother.
Potentially, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say it because I've been in no way affiliated to them, but I think if I was the IPRF, I'd probably want to address that issue.
I think it needs to be sorted out. I think they've got to sit down and they've got to have a damn good chat about it and work it out. But and the problem is, if they want to bring a precedence type thing into this, right? Well, what stops me from drilling a hole in the front end of a MDT chassis, right? And saying it's proprietary because it's my hole.
Or cutting an inch off the end.
Whatever, right? You see, once the problem with this,
wouldn't MDT have to approve that hole or the inch off?
Why?
Well, yeah, why? They should do, but why?
Right,
yeah.
Right. So in other words, what's the difference?
Yeah.
See, when you start making concessions down a slippery slope, there's no way you can get back up it.
Yeah, and I think going forward, the reason I even found myself talking about factory this last 6 months is since the Worlds were announced in the UK next year, I've had young and new shooters coming to me saying,
yep,
I'd like to have a go at that, but they've been genuinely perturbed by some of the open guns that are out there now in 2.2. Some of them are frightening. Phenomenal pieces of engineering.
Yeah, amazing.
Phenomenal things made by wonderful companies and all that sort of stuff. And they've said to me, explain the rules to me because I want to be able to try and qualify and have a chance of qualifying. And I'll be forgiven by factory shooters for saying that the likelihood of qualifying for factory on the whole is probably slightly higher than open. And I think the fact that a few open shooters have dropped out of open and into factory in order to qualify have shown that. And these are people that have gone on the internet saying, in factory.
I don't know about that. Okay, okay. Let me just try and think this through quickly. Work my head through it. Right.
You don't have to be logic. It just happened. It's happened, hasn't it? There's people that said,
But there's a reason. There's another reason for it, right? Which it's my thinking reason for it, right? If you're allowing a slippery slope to occur, right, in factory division, and open guns are now in factory division, right? You've now got open 2.0.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that kind of makes it that those shooters who couldn't shoot well in open, couldn't get chosen for an open team, are now having to move to a factory team to try and get an accolade there.
Because there's a two-tiered open system.
Because you've got open 2.0 with the slippery slope story going on, right? That's a complete joke. It makes a mockery of factory division completely, right? And where's it going? It doesn't help anybody because you become, what do we want factory division to be known as? The division for open shooters that couldn't make open division.
So what we're saying going forwards, because we can only look forwards. We can't dwell on the past. I mean, if you're an individual sportsman and you've been to a sporting event and you feel aggrieved, there's recourse and stuff you can do. If you're a manufacturer and you feel aggrieved, there's things you can do legally. Looking forwards, going forwards, what we're looking at is for future events, we're looking at clarity and we're looking at an open dialogue with shooters about if things are or aren't factory.
I think that needs to happen. I think there needs to
be a safe environment to do it in as well. Because if I ask a question about something, saying, well, is that, I'm not saying I don't think that's factory. Is that factory? What I'm implying is, I don't think it is.
Correct.
And straight away, there's a recourse there because a manufacturer could rightly say they're accusing our firearm of not being factory. No. What we're saying is, let's have that healthy dialogue to discuss why something is factory, and why something isn't. And I think that's down to comms. That's down to accessibility from event organisers, be it domestic or international, to say, let's explain to you and reassure you why this is the case. And if that comes down to simply lining up all the rifles on a wall and saying it must be one of these, which is what you did back in the day.
Yep, that's exactly what needs to happen. Yeah, that needs to happen. And to be honest, there has to be, I think a line needs to be drawn, right? To say, hold a second, guys, this has happened in the past. Mistakes were made with the following rifles in the last World Championships. We totally get it. It was an oversight. Let's move on past it. Let's get it right going forward. Let's put a list together. Let's make it fair, absolutely fair, right? And the problem is, those rifles that have been in the past that have been allowed will probably not be allowed in the future, right? Because again, once you're on a slippery slope, it's like, well, have you got a cup of coffee? Is it a cup of coffee with milk, or is it milk with a cup of coffee, right? What are you talking about, right? So there has to be that absolute, and it has to be an absolute line that is drawn. Otherwise, you will always have a sense of unfairness, and people feeling that they're being marginalized, and that's not cool. You can't have that in sport.
I think what you just said is we always struggle to find a name for these podcasts, and Christian normally comes with this clever. Well, this is the slippery slope of factory shooting, then, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You said slippery slope.
Absolutely, right.
And again,
and it shouldn't be.
We've done things before where we've asked a question, and what we're not doing is naming, shaming, and criticizing. What we're doing is encouraging transparency, openness, discussion, engagement,
absolutely,
and all those positive things to reassure the shooting community that everything's above board. That's probably the best way.
I think what's important is that questions need to be asked and answered, right? And I think that as long as the people, you've got the IPRF is built on 3 layers, right? The bottom layer is the executive committee, right? The people above them who are the oversight is the council. Now there's 1 representative from every single country. And then above that is what they call the General Assembly, which is 2 representatives from every single country, less the Executive Committee. So in other words, the Executive Committee doesn't sit on the General Assembly. So the General Assembly has the ultimate vote in the end of the day of sorting this out. And they can completely and utterly bypass the Executive and tell them what to do. So
what I'll say for the benefit of clarity as well is, I've sat on those groups in the past. The signal chats and all that. This is a massive, massive monster of a thing.
Yep.
And the chance for miscommunication and breakdowns in communication are considerable. Where if you're not effectively communicating with the whole mechanism, decisions can be made that perhaps are made with the best of intentions, because these are all good people. These are all people who are in the sport. They're all volunteers. They don't get paid. If this was someone that was people that were salaried, it's easy to throw mud like in the Olympics. But we're not saying that. These are all good people that none of them are legal experts. None of them are paid professionals. The people that are trying their hardest to make it as fair as possible. But based on the last sort of few months, what you're saying is there's a rumbling within the shooting community that perhaps things need to be reviewed or discussed, or going forward,
absolutely,
even changes need making. And I'm quite simple with it. If I say to my wife, "What do you want for tea?" If she gives me a list of the 10 things that are available, I don't freestyle it, do I? She says, these are the 10 things in the fridge. If it's a case that factory has to be as prescriptive as, these 100 rifles are what we class as factory for the following reasons. So if you don't go out and buy one of them, you're going to be excluded from that competition. If it has to be so prescriptive for the sake of fairness, then so be it. All you hope is the person making that list is switched on enough and experienced enough to make it competitive. Otherwise,
I think that's what you've hit on there. I think you've hit on it there, is that you need to have it can't be one person, right? No. First of all, right? And I think it has to be a representation of factory division shooters, right? Right, that are not affiliated to a factory. In other words, not sponsored. And I think that possibly it might be that you might need to get a couple of manufacturers on board to actually be part of that adjudication process as well.
And I just scribble it down because this was a point that I've made in the past that I'm going to say, because there are people out there that think it. This is a lot of work. In some organisations, this would fall into the too hard to do category. And I know there are people out there that would be happy to see factory disappear for a combination of reasons. They're open-minded, they're open shooting focused individuals who don't even see it as competitive enough. It's beneath them. I know some people that think that factory is beneath them, but then equally, they don't want to put the work in to do it properly. It's that problem child, isn't it? You don't put the time into it. It's almost that job that in the office that no one wants. That's a ball.
Personally,
so let's say what it is. There are people out there that would be happy to see factory disappear, wouldn't there?
Yeah, they would. Yeah, they are. Yeah, I think they are. I mean, I think it's an inconvenience for some. But just remember, it's you're giving 4 extra people the opportunity to represent your country.
Oh, right? I think it's brilliant.
It's freaking amazing, right? You're involving the manufacturers in the sport from top to bottom, right? Factory is harder, right, than open division. It is more difficult. It's a more challenging sport. It's a more purist sport, right? You do have to shoot some stages slightly differently to the way other people shoot stages, and it's what it is. But it makes you a better shooter.
And I think against the backdrop of lots of people saying that, certainly in this country, I don't know about the States or whatever else, but against the backdrop of lots of people saying that competitive shooting is becoming too expensive for them, certainly in centrefire.
Yep.
I know people who are retiring their open guns to move to factory and centrefire because the costs have just got away from them.
Right.
I know one lad who said to me, can I as an RFD sell this firearm on their behalf and source them a factory gun in centrefire so they can continue to compete, but in a different division.
Yeah.
That's down to costs. So against the backdrop of increasing costs and people struggling to justify the money they're spending, not having factory would basically exclude a big chunk of people from taking part in the sport because they wouldn't feel they could compete, because it becomes, and I've heard this phrase an awful lot, it becomes an arms race.
Well, I mean, factory's going to do that a little bit to a degree as well, if you think about it. I mean, it's buying a Volkswagen Golf, right? And competing against a Ferrari is always going to be challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're doing it on a slightly off-road track in which the Ferrari hasn't got a hope in hell, right? But it's horses for courses, you know. And again, going back to those reasons at the start, it would be very hard to define things by price, right? So it's a different sport. I would encourage national bodies to review these issues inside of their countries, right? Mm. But I don't know that those issues are world championship reason-changing divisions, if that makes sense, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just think, I mean, really, in the end of the day, it would be, we need to get clarity on this. We all need clarity on it. It's creating confusion. It's creating heartache for those people who adhere to the rules, right? Pitch up, compete with rifles that are absolutely 100% factory rifles, and you're trying to race a Mercedes DTM against a tricked out Dakar rally car, right? It's never gonna work, you know.
And so the situation that we want to avoid at all costs is someone sat on a factory leaderboard at a position, looking up with their belief that some of the rifles above them shouldn't qualify for factory, because then by extension those people should be disqualified in the simplest of terms.
Correct.
And they should then move up. And in a
sport, correct. And I'm thinking about just thinking about that, right? Think about the sponsorship opportunities that come with the top 4 places on the leaderboard in your country.
Yeah.
Right. Now think about, well, hold a second. Maybe the top 3 guys are now using basically effectively open guns, right? In factory division. And then all the rest of them are using factory guns. Hold a second.
Yeah, if that situation happened,
that's not okay. That's
not
okay.
Then the people below would be less interested in the sport because they've got a false position that's not based on their skill and performance.
Well, correct.
It's based on the fact that you know Formula One. It's based on the fact
Yep.
that that someone else had a curse system before they did.
Correct. Yeah.
It's that Formula One had to deal with curse. They got it wrong.
Or rather, somebody pitched up with a turbo, right? And turbos have been outlawed. Well, they snuck a turbo in anyway. I told an official that it's a gas accelerator. It's a gas injector. It's not a turbo. It's a gas assisted injector.
And there's 6 months before people bring in the analysis and research to establish that they're one and the same thing. But in that time, you've won the space race, haven't you?
Correct. So you've got they have it has to be sorted out, right? There are going to be some losers in this in terms of those who have wangled their way into the division, right? But it's literally 1 or 2 rifles. Now, do you want to go and try and make a slippery slope just to save face for 1 or 2 and completely wreck the division, right?
Or the easy thing is just get rid of factory.
Well, yeah, but that is to be such a loss to the sport.
Oh, massive, and it would be the biggest retrograde step that the sport could make.
Correct.
It's the one constant that you see in a vast changing world of technology within.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly.
It's the last bastion of whatever the word is. I said purist before. You used a better word than it was. Okay.
But I mean, I think that's kind of the basic. I think we've covered pretty much everything there. It's sad that this has happened. It's frustrating. It's frustrating for those of us who enjoy the division, right? It feels like we've all been let down, right? For those who competed and who adhered to the rules, must be sitting at home going, that was unfair. That was totally and utterly unfair. That's right. The second part is, what about the guys who actually used those rifles? So are they forever going to be known as the guys who failed in open division?
That's for the government, please, domestically and internationally, to address.
And Facebook and social media, it'll be out there. It's just very sad. It's sad that we are where we are.
Me, as someone who's got individuals who are trying to qualify for future events, I would like a really clear list of factory guns, so I can make sure no one spends time and money on a platform that subsequently fails to meet the criteria. So that's I'd like to see that as well, but I'd like to see a fair list of factory rifles, right? Yeah. I don't want to see a list that has got people sneaking in because this person gave that one a backhander, or this one made a mistake and that happened and this happened, and whatever social media thing gets put out there, I don't think that's ever happened.
No, I agree.
We'd certainly hope those things don't happen, and I think.
Yes, but I think you're right.
Let me just say, for the sake of clarity, I think if there's been any errors, omissions, or misjudgments, I think they've all been made with the best of intentions.
No, I agree on that, right?
By people who have done their absolute best.
Absolutely.
But perhaps have misunderstood the framework based on the fact that they're not all dead clever.
Yeah.
All we can ask for going forwards is that there's that transparency, that there's a clear and fair list of factors.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that the shooting community and the supporters of the shooting community that watch on are reassured that it's a fair sport to be in, and that everyone's going to be afforded the same opportunities and advantages to other people. And that's
absolutely. And I was just as I was just saying that, it really was. We want to avoid this heartache. We want to avoid the social. Oh, what is that old term that they used to use in the old days? Regarding social media, everything blowing up. It was an American term used for precision rifle. Anyway, the shenanigans, right?
Yeah.
You want to avoid that on social media, and really, as you said, if they could just sort out a good bunch of people who have a clear understanding, who are capable of putting together a list that we can all follow, right?
Yeah.
Happy days.
Yeah. we'd all
Move
endorse
on.
that with some manufacturer support. Brilliant.
Yep. Happy days.
We've covered an awful lot of ground. A lot of, I'll point out for the benefit of those listening, a lot of what we're talking about is things that are being discussed openly on Facebook. There's no secret club and discussion and handshake and all that sort of stuff. There are people out there who have their views on things. I have my views on everything. I've got an opinion on everything. Someone would say opinions are like arseholes. Everybody's got one. I might have more than one arsehole, I think, the way this is looking. I won't pretend to be right. I won't pretend to have the final say. But we've got to discuss these things, otherwise the damage becomes compounded over time.
Agreed.
And people go into competitions with less faith than they had before the previous competition, and before you know it, it undermines either a governing body, a national governing body, or international, or the sport itself. So the plea from us is, looking forwards, let's have some discussion about factory, or about all the divisions. Let's have a real grown-up conversation about how we can make sure that everyone's satisfied that the sport is fair and clean and all that sort of stuff.
I think if I can add to that even further, right, is be part of the conversation, but do so from an educated position.
Well, that's it,
right?
Yeah.
Right? Go out there, read the rule book, right? If you don't understand stuff, ask questions.
And let's be straight about it. You wrote the rule book, so whilst I might say I've got an opinion on things, it's safe to say that if you've got an opinion on things, it's from a much more informed position. So that's the moral to the story here. We've been fortunate. I've been fortunate to now an hour and 15 minutes of listening to someone, wherever he is on next to me, who wrote the rule book and understands the rule book. And if Rob has concerns or observations about something, then I think we as the shooting community should sort of sit up and pay attention to that. And I'd only hope that any people out there that are listening that think that they could do a better job in clarifying some of these issues or reassuring confidence and all that sort of stuff, please, if you want to come and talk on this podcast, we'll come and talk about it, and we'll give you an opportunity to address some of the issues that are out there on social media being discussed. Rob, we always have this, you and I. We could do this forever. We could go on forever talking.
Absolutely. And you know what you said is great there, right? Maybe next time we bring some other guys on and we have a bit of an open discussion. I think it'd be a great way to do things.
Yeah, I mean, just for the sake of being thorough, I mean, Christian's position on this, and I'm gonna have to read it because he made it clear that he wanted to be here, but he wanted to make sure that his position was clear. Bear with me. This is where
This is where you get old and you need glasses, right? Like me.
Absolutely, mate. My glasses are over there. I can't remember. Christian felt in a very difficult position because he competed in the Worlds, and he felt that if anyone had an opinion on it, we might ask him for a direct opinion on it. Christian's one of the fairest guys you'll meet, and he didn't want Rob or I to put him in a position where, having been there shooting, he was asked for, because I've got an opinion, you've got an opinion, but we weren't there and we weren't competing. So it's fair to put Christian in that position. So Christian will forgive us, but that's why he's not here. Mate, I'm going to call it. We've had a fantastic...
Awesome, buddy.
Thanks for coming. I look forward to the next one, which who knows what that'll be. If it's with someone who's coming to talk to us about what's happened and what's going to happen in the future with factory, that'd be great. Someone from the IPRF wants to come and talk about factory in the future, that'd be fantastic. The door's always open. Right, mate, thank you very much.
Anytime, buddy.
And I look forward to the next one.
So do I. Catch you later.
Out there in podcast land, as Christian would say, be nice to one each other. Did you say be nice to each other, to one another, look after yourselves, all those things rolled into one, whatever Christian would say, straight back at you. Thanks, folks. Take care.